Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to those who've just joined in. We are still seeing colleagues who are joining in. Maybe let's allow them to come in and we'll start in the next minute. I promise in the next minute we'll start. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on which part of the world you are joining us from. My name is Mphobohle Mapena Lunga from Sonke Gender Justice, based in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, and I'm one of the 4 MenCare Global co-coordinators. We are super excited today to host this webinar on normalizing equal parental leave, which is the 5th series of webinars that MenCare has hosted over the past few months. The webinar series have also been centered around the strategic recommendations from the State of the World Fathers 2023 report, which was launched in Kigali in July this year. The webinar series highlights examples and evidence of care systems from around the world that engage men in unpaid care work. The webinar also comes at an incredible moment where we are celebrating the judgment by the Joburg High Court that will now see South African fathers enjoy up to 4 months of parental leave and associated unemployment insurance fund benefits. What this means is that new parents from a natural birth will be able to determine how the 4 months of parental leave is shared among themselves, while parents of surrogate children and adoptive parents of children under the age of 2 will also get to enjoy the same parental leave rights. I'll not preempt this judgment as my colleague Kayan will be sharing more about this. MenCare envisions a world where men doing care work is so normal that men not doing care work becomes the anomaly. Normalizing equal parental leave would mean fathers not taking leave to care for infants would be abnormal, and that workplaces would find it strange if male employees did not use their available leave. More countries and employers are offering parental leave to fathers, and this trend is likely to continue as governments and employers increasingly appreciate care, including men's care. My colleague Gary Barker from Equimundo, at one of our sessions during Women Deliver earlier this year in Kigali, said a very profound statement that stood out for me. He said, and I quote, "We need a world that has men and boys who care about care." For me, that really struck me, and it still stays in my mind and thoughts for months, because that is something that is a food for thought. But there are still barriers. Parental leave is still too short in many places, and it's often not fully paid, and informally or self-employed workers have the least available parental leave across all countries. The MenCare Global Fatherhood campaign advocates that the gold standard for parental leave provision is fully paid. Equal parental leave of at least 14 weeks for all parents, regardless of sex, including a portion of non-transferable leave for fathers. This webinar is going to highlight the relevant recommendations from the State of the World Fathers 2023 report relating to the provision of parental leave. Without wasting much time, I'm excited that we have a diverse expert panelists joining us today, who include parents, lawyers, and advocates with a wide range of experiences navigating and advancing access to paid parental leave. We have my colleague Tavishi from Equimundo, who is also one of the MenCare Global co-coordinators. We also have Jonathan from the Parent Center, and we also are joined by Kayan from Lawyers for Human Rights. We also have Delfina all the way from Argentina, ALA, and last but definitely not least, we have Nick from the World Policy Center. And please do feel free to post questions or engage more with us on the chat box that is available. So I would like to hand over to our first speaker, my fellow colleague Tavishi, who will speak through the MenCare State of the World Father context on caring recommendation. Tavishi, welcome and over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Empo. Let me begin by saying thank you very much to all those who are attending the webinar today. I'm really excited to talk about this topic and joined by such a sort of diverse, as Empo said, group of people who are talking about parental leave from different perspectives. I think that is key and so helpful to get that holistic understanding of what we need to do to see this vision about parental leave come true. Before I begin, just a quick introduction to what MenCare is. As Empo alluded to, MenCare is a global fatherhood campaign, and it has been active for more than 12 years now. It has signed up more than 100 partners across 65 countries, and it has produced 5 of the State of the World's Fathers reports and hosted 3 international symposiums. The sort of larger vision of MenCare is to see men doing 50% of the global share of care work, and also finding purpose in caregiving and advocating alongside women for care policies. We had the inaugural conference in Cape Town, and part of sort of MenCare's goals have been to increase high-level attention and commitment to the urgency and the larger kind of concept and value of care equity and men's roles as caregivers. We also, as I mentioned with State of the World's Fathers, we elevate global evidence on men's engagement as equal caregivers, and we continue to foster a global community of practice on men and caregiving. So today I'm going to be speaking about the State of the World's Fathers 2023, but also drawing on our previous State of the World's Fathers reports. And as I mentioned, and as Empo mentioned, today's webinar is about the N in our caring acronym, which is to normalize equal parental leave for mothers, fathers, and all caregivers, and for care of all kinds. Next slide, please. So I want to begin by showing that in 2019, that's the cover of our 2019 report, that was specifically focused on the workplace institutions and the ways in which there are barriers at workplace institutional level that are creating kind of barriers to men's uptake of parental leave. Next, Jean-Marie, there's a quote that I think is really helpful, because I think what we found in that report was there was a desire to understand at individual level, a desire that their men want to take paternity leave. So let me read the quote out. Paternity leave is definitely a necessity. I can draw from my own experience. Being present during childbirth allowed me to feel the greatness of mothers. It also helped me cultivate a stronger sense of responsibility. This quote comes from a study that we cited in the State of the World's Fathers 2019. And what it's showing is that there are men who are beginning to understand, as a result of paternity leave, the importance of being involved fathers and caregivers. If you go to the next one, yeah, thank you. What we found in 2019 and 2023, and there's global evidence around that, is that there are structural barriers for men to be able to take that kind of parental leave. So the quote from our MenCare partner in Malaysia, Respect and Trust for All SOWF, shows not all Malaysian men are able to bond with their newborns from their first days of life, as there are still 0 days of paid paternity leave provided in employment laws in parts of Malaysia. It's still widely believed that a man's role as a parent is to help rather than be an active and engaged partner. So this quote from our MenCare partner shows that structural barriers like laws, policies, norms continue to act in ways that prohibit men from being the caregivers that they want to be. And I think that's sort of the key, and what our other panelists will speak about as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so what we find is that parental leave is transformative when it's done right. And our research has shown that it can establish a pattern of shared participation in care work that persists after the leave period. Evidence from Sweden, for example, finds that the gender gap in unpaid care shrinks in proportion to the length of parental leave taken by fathers. And another study in Sweden and Canada found that increases in men's involvement in care work on weekdays and on weekends can actually continue even after parental leave has concluded. It can also increase fathers' comfort, competency, and a sense of responsibility as parents so that they're more likely to take leave and care equitably. Again, research from high-income countries like the United States and Canada shows that men and parents who have access to extended time off work for newborn care have an opportunity to focus on childcare without workplace demands. And that is critical to putting in place more gender equal division of care in the household. It can also change the social and political acceptability of men's uptake of leave and shift the individual attitudes about care roles. Evidence from Spain shows that when the duration of paternity leave with 100% wage replacement increased from 2 to 4 weeks, it was equal leave for mothers, the legislation itself was a political and social legitimization of leave uptake from fathers and led to 80% more uptake after it came into effect. And the wave of support continued. Spain's paid parental leave expanded to 16 weeks for all parents as of 2021. And nationally representative longitudinal data from the 9 countries. Can you go back, Jean-Marie? Sorry, could you go back one, please? Thank you. That sort of nationally representative longitudinal data shows from 9 countries that changes to parental leave policies that specifically incentivize or encourage fathers to take time off are associated with improvements in attitudes towards women's equality among men and women. And we have an example from both Argentina and South Africa later on that will show that. Next slide, please. So not only are we seeing evidence that men and women sort of fare better, and that they are taking more leave when there are sort of national policies and structures in place, but in our 2023 study of men and women across 17 countries, over 12,000 participants, at individual level too, men and women affirm, fathers and mothers affirm that taking parental leave will be beneficial to them, to fathers, to mothers, and to children. And if you see the percentages, it's almost, more than 80% of the sample is saying that. Particularly at the bottom, at the right quadrant, bottom right quadrant, 88% of fathers say that father's leave will benefit mothers and children. So we're seeing sort of this individual desire and affirmation that parental leave is good for families to thrive. Next slide, please. As Empo said, can you click? Yeah, thank you. Click. Parental leave is increasing, but there are still several ways in which that we need to kind of do better by parental leave globally. It varies in length and is often short. Our colleague Nick Perry will talk a little bit about sort of what kind of parental leave is available all over the world. But what we're finding is that 9 days is the global average with many country variations, right? And non-transferable leave is even shorter for fathers. It is particularly set up, sorry, Jean-Marie, back one more slide back, please. Thank you. It is set up to benefit, as Empo said, only those in formal employment. It's very much does not provide benefits for the millions of people who work in the informal sector or are self-employed. And it is also inequitable and sort of skews very much for heterosexual couples and is not kind of available. Only a minority of countries actually offer paid parental leave to same-sex couples. And when that leave is offered, same-sex couples often receive shorter periods of leave than heterosexual parents. So we need to do a better job with not just kind of saying we need to offer parental leave, but we also need to be able to offer it to certain segments of population which are not going to benefit from the traditional ways in which parental leave is thought about. Next slide, please. So something that we talked about in the previous webinar, which is about investing in men and investing in care, was also investing in people as voters. And I want to highlight that you have to invest in men even as employers. There's something with respect to parental leave that workplace institutions can do. And in our 2023 SOWF findings, what we see is, if you see the sort of, the right-hand side of the bars, that's the father's responses. Almost 45% are willing to change jobs in order for them to get more parental leave. 42% are willing to take unpaid leave, and 1/3, almost 29% are willing to completely give up their jobs. So at workplace, private sector level, this is an equally important issue. There are people willing to make changes and take actions to kind of get more parental leave. So if the starting premise is that people and men, women, people of all genders, they want more parental leave, then the change needs to happen at structural level. And that's sort of what we want to position and show in this webinar today. The last slide, if you could go to the next one, Jean-Marie, is data that we collected particularly in the United States in 2020 and 2021 during the pandemic. And so when we see these kind of macroeconomic, socio-political shocks that happen, the ways in which parental leave benefits kind of expand, flexible work hours, what does that mean? And what we saw, we did this work with about 40 to 50 companies in the United States. They themselves responded at institutional level that it had profound positive impact on employee morale and employee retention. So the companies that actually had flexible and paid family leaves that they put into place during the pandemic were able to retain their employees and had employees that they said had higher morale. So there's case to be made that we need to do work at sort of public sector level and then at private sector level as well. So I want to thank you for letting me be a part of this. Can you go to the last slide? The recommendations that came out of the next slide, please, Jean-Marie. The recommendations that came out of the State of the World's Fathers 2023 are exactly what MPO said. One is that governments need to establish equal, fully paid, non-transferable parental leave for all parents. What that means is that the most successful leave for fathers is fully paid and non-transferable, meaning that if the father doesn't use his allocated days, they lose it. Governments must work to ensure the distribution of paid leave across diverse income groups and employment categories is applicable, including, as I mentioned, informally employed workers. The next recommendation says that we have to make more paid parental leave days available for men. So it's not enough to have 2 weeks for men, which has sort of been, a lot of sort of gold standard for many of the high income countries. We need to have, as Empo mentioned, minimum 14 weeks for both parents as a minimum, and again, non-transferable portion for fathers. And finally, the last recommendation says that we need to have regional and multilateral entities that kind of work towards regional directives that encourage or mandate parental leave policies across more countries. So with these 4 recommendations, I'm going to stop here and turn it over to EMPO to sort of let our diverse and fabulous colleagues take it into more sort of specific examples of how parental leave is making a difference in equal and equitable caregiving.
Thank you so much, Tavishi. I really enjoyed how you framed your whole presentation, because it kind of sets the tone for how we are going to have our next speakers share their experiences. I think one thing that stood out for me is when you were mentioning that when the policies and laws are done correctly, when it is done right, when it comes to parental leave, there's a lot of benefits really that come with it. But I'm also excited that my next speaker, Jonathan, who's going to be speaking to us about the experience on fathers taking up parental leave, will also add more on what you were sharing with us, Tavishi. So without wasting much time, Jonathan, can I hand over to you to share with us some of these wonderful experiences on fathers taking up parental leave? Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, and to all of us South Africans who are coming down from a Rugby World Cup high. Go Bokke. So I'm welcoming you and saying hello from a Friday afternoon in Cape Town, from an organization called the Parent Center. And really what I'm going to be speaking about is more that on the ground anecdotal experience as an organization that has been working with parents for the past 40 years, largely around a positive parenting methodology, trying to move away from authoritarian parenting styles that often use coercive violence and corporal punishment, and towards a more still boundary setting but communicative and positive parenting methodology. So TPC has been around for 40 years. Previous to 2011, we were often running one day or one session workshops with fathers. But from 2011, we started running father specific programs. So we're now 12 years into running fatherhood programs. What we do is we offer a 6 session fatherhood program um, that takes fathers through aspects of their own parenting experience and then starts to unpack their lived experience as fathers. And it's this lived experience that I'm really going to be speaking about. So, to give you an idea of kind of the context, last year we had over 180 fathers going through our fatherhood courses. And these are fathers that are largely from working class communities, ranging from places like Lavender Hill and Houtbay and Philippi and Heidelberg all the way to, Guguletu and Khayelitsha. And in all of them, it's a narrative of changing stereotypes around men and women, but around men and fathers, but at the same time acknowledging men's role in gender-based violence as perpetrators, as enablers, as sometimes those that are complicit, and that sometimes men that are silent in the face of gender-based violence are complicit. So we're working with fathers, but we're working within a context of a sad war on women very much in this country. And we're working in changing stereotypes that are deeply rooted in all of the cultures of South Africa. For those of you who don't know, South Africa has 11 official languages. We have a wide range of cultures. Almost all of them are patriarchal. All of them have kind of conservative notions of fathers as the breadwinning role, as the one who goes out every day, earns the money for the family and comes back. What is known as colloquially now as the ATM father. And father interventions are constantly confronting this paradox of a negativity towards men versus a need for father involvement. And so in fatherhood, we want fathers to get more involved. And the feedback from fathers is very much of fathers wanting to be more involved in fathering and in speaking about what is now more and more globally being talked about as the father wound, the impact of the absence of fathers in the lives of children and how it carries over, and how, especially in South Africa, because of its economic situation, its migrant labor practices, its history of forced removals, that in many respects we have fathers trying to father having never been fathered themselves. Um, but at the same time, in acknowledging the father wound, what we also come up time and time again, and I think it's going to be one of the themes of my feedback when we talk about parental leave, is the role of females and of moms in gatekeeping and in entrenching the social norm of the absent father. So society feels that the need for fathers to set boundaries, to be the breadwinner, but when faced with the economic realities of, massive unemployment and social structures that often entrench a unfair role of parenting that often puts the bulk of parenting into the hands of women, often fathers find it difficult to navigate into that space where they can be caregivers. And we're seeing this more and more in one of the things that the Parent Center does is involves, we offer counseling. And currently, where our counseling used to be often on behavioral issues, about 60% of it is now on co-parenting. And that co-parenting discourse is an extremely bitter one, where often relationships where there was misogyny and violence almost become the opposite, with women not wanting any contact with their ex-partner, with their children. And a lot of our co-parenting is around this kind of notion that a man can be a bad partner, but not necessarily a bad father. And increasingly within South Africa, this links to the discourse on parental alienation. When we work with fathers, the thing that really shocks fathers in the workshops that we have is when we talk about the negative effects of fathers not being involved. And you know, this is very documented in terms of the impact that it has on boys, the impact that it has on girls. But the thing that also surprises fathers is that there is a great benefit to men as individuals in getting involved in fathering, and especially, and this speaks to parental, leave, in getting involved in that early first thousand days of fathering. It softens men, it reduces risky behavior, it reduces alcohol, and other harmful substance use. um, when we work with women, more and more we talk about the impact of labeling of boys and how that labeling of boys runs through into the labeling of men. And this is the thing that shocks women. And I want to illustrate this with a recent, really amazing intervention that we had with an amazing Cape Town-based NGO, which is the Centre of Early Childhood Development, that runs a whole series of ECDs. And they were coming to us and saying, we want more fathers to be involved in our ECDs, and let's run a workshop. And we ran a workshop with the principals and the staff members of ECDs in 5 different communities. And one of the first things that we did is we did an icebreaker where we asked them to think of a positive male role model who had been in their lives. And the vast majority could not, you know. And when we talked about an exercise around, well, what do you think of men? Again, this narrative of men are trash kind of came out. And so this disconnect between, we want dads, and in this ECD intervention, we train ECD staff in how to then encourage father involvement, to then run interventions with fathers. We then ran interventions with fathers. And what was interesting was the narrative of fathers in saying how they felt unwelcome in ECDs. That when they come to ECD, the staff say, but where's the mom? And that a lot of the communication goes to mom. And you see this carried across into schooling as well. So in a sense, if we want parental leave, and I think this is the importance of something like parental leave, is the home is often seen as private. It's seen as a sacrosanct place in which often government officials are fearful to tread. It's a common experience of women in domestic violence is when they go to police stations to report, the police are hesitant to get involved because they go, no, 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 this is the family, and it's not our role. And so for me, parental leave is an official acknowledgement that fathers play a critical role in the care of children in that first 1,000 days, which legitimizes the role of fathers. And the more interventions that we have outside of the home around fatherhood, like the ECD intervention that, for example, we had, shows and enables fatherhood involvement that can then impact into the narratives and the discussions that men and women are having as parents. Because I think one of the things that really came out is we're in an interesting space where there has been this positive process of feminism that has seen women, rightfully so, saying, why do I need to be in the kitchen? Why do I need to be the secretary? I should be the lawyer. Why do I need to be the nurse? Why should, I should be the doctor? But those same women and a lot of the social worker, the female social workers that I work with, when I was saying, well, but do you allow your husband into the kitchen to cook? And they go, no, 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 the kitchen's my parameter. So I think, parental leave recognizes the place for a man that allows for families to start to have these interventions. And I want to leave with I want to end with a very sweet story. So one of our programs is a parent-infant program that works in the the clinics, the MOUs. In South Africa, we've got there's a reduction in the rate of marriage. And one of the things that's contributing to that is a lot of our cultures have a bride price, what is known as lobola. Um, and often for young men and women that are engaging in relationships, the economic reality of being able to meet those lobola prices make formalizing relationships difficult. But relationships are still happening, which means that women are still getting pregnant. And here in Cape Town, with amongst the SOWF, for example, there's a notion that if a woman gets pregnant, a man needs to pay damages as a recompense, not to the woman, but to the woman's family. And we had a case recently of a young couple where the father really wanted to be engaged in the life of his baby, but both the father's family and the mother's family hadn't resolved this damages question and weren't allowing access. And the only place where he could meet up with his baby was at that baby clinic. So I think these type of interventions are really important in changing entrenched culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Jonathan. And thank you for sharing with us the experiences on the ground. I think it really gives us an insight. I think I saw some of my colleagues when you were mentioning how when you did the exercise on the positive male role model, how most of our faces were really kind of depressed. And I'm sure even our other colleagues who've joined us for this webinar, I'm sure they felt that pain and that impact that has when you share that. And I think something that I'm taking away from what you've spoken about is how, as I mentioned earlier on, how MenCare really envisions a world where men doing care work is so normal that men that are not doing care work becomes an anomaly, especially when you're speaking about the role of men within the ECD sector, which is something that we still need to do kind of a lot of work around that, because I think our communities, because of the lack of positive male role models we have, there's still that bit of being skeptical about involving men in the ECD centers. So thank you so much, Jonathan. And I also want to invite colleagues who are joining us that if you have questions or areas of clarity, to use the question and answer box so that we can try and pick up some of the conversations. So coming up next is our speaker, Kayan, who is going to be speaking to us on the litigation of equal parental leave in South Africa. I'm super, super excited. And I'm sure all of us, especially those who are in South Africa, are very, very excited about this. So Kayan, over to you before I preempt everything.
Hi, good afternoon, colleagues, and good morning to those who are joining us from across the different time zones. My humblest apologies for having my camera off. I'm currently experiencing load shedding, so my internet connection is a little bit unstable. So it brings me great pleasure to be able to speak about litigating on equal parental leave in South Africa. You can move to the next slide. Thanks, Jean-Marie. So I will be speaking about the Van Wyks case, essentially, that was recently, just last week, judgment was handed down in this regard. And I'd like to start with just by giving a bit of context about how this case came about. And of course, it's important to understand who was involved. So in terms of the matter, we had 4 sets of applicants, the 2 parents involved, Mr. and Mrs. Van Wyk, who was the first and second applicant, SOWF Gender Justice, who was the third applicant, and then we had the Commission for Gender Equality, who later joined as a 4th intervening party. And then, of course, on the other side, we had the Minister of Employment and Labour, who who determines and is responsible for the enforcement of the Unemployment Insurance Fund and, of course, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, which is the issue in question. So the facts of the case is that Mr. and Mrs. van Wyk had a child in April 2021. And what was interesting in this case is that the biological mother, Mrs. van Wyk, is actually a CEO of 2 small independent businesses. And between the 2 parents, when they gave birth to their child, they decided that it made the most sense for the father, Mr. van Wyk, to be the primary caregiver of their child, because it didn't make sense for Mrs. van Wyk to, in her role, to leave her business, and they would suffer financial loss, significant financial loss. But in addition to that, they felt that he was able, the father, Mr. van Wyk, would be able to provide the best care for their child, and that it was in their child's best interest to do so. So he then went and applied for maternity leave as stipulated under the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, which is Section 25, and his employer's policy. Interestingly enough, the employer came back and rejected his application on the following grounds. They said that, number one, maternity leave was only for female employees who had given birth, and they were entitled to 4 months. Alternatively, if he was undergoing an adoption process, he could apply for 10 weeks of primary caregiver leave, and that, of course, includes same-sex partners. And then, of course, the other partner would be able to take 10 days. And then thirdly, there was the parental leave, which he would be entitled to, which is also known as paternity leave in South Africa for partners or the alternative same-sex partner in the relationship, which is 10 days. So as he was rejected, Mr. van Wyk decided, fine, we're still going to proceed as planned. I'm going to be the primary caregiver. He ended up taking his annual leave and requested a sabbatical at his company. He was able to demonstrate, there was also, whilst he was a primary caregiver, he also suffered short-term financial prejudice in order to care for their child. Next slide, please. So the legal arguments in terms of Mr. and Mrs. van Wyk, Jean-Marie, if you could move on to the next, thank you. So the legal arguments in terms of the first and second applicant, which were the van Wyks, is they said you needed to read employee in section 25.1, 25.2a, and 25.5 of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act to include all parents. Sorry, Jean-Marie, I think you've gone one slide. If you can go back one slide. Back. Jean-Marie, I think you're moving forward in the slides. You need to move quite a few slides back at this point. If you can, okay, if you can move down 2 slides, I think we should be where we should be. Perfect, thank you. So as I've mentioned, the Van Wyks wanted to read employees as interpreted. Let me just continue while we get to this slide. So they wanted to include the reading of all parents, irrespective of whether they gave birth or not. In the alternative, their argument was that Section 25 of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act is unconstitutional and invalid because it excludes non-birthing parents in this regard. The second argument was by SOWF Gender Justice and the Commission for Gender Equality, who essentially agreed on the approach that was put forward. And their argument was that Section 25 of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act is unconstitutional and invalid because, firstly, it was not aligned to the definition of parent in the Children's Act, which includes biological fathers, commissioning parents in surrogacy, adoptive parents, and spouses of parents who give birth via artificial fertilization using one of the spouse's gametes. So essentially the same leave is not granted anywhere else in the BCEA for these category of parents. There's differing periods of leave for them. They also argued that Section 25A1 of the BCEA should allow for all parents to be granted 4 months of leave each. So in other words, they were arguing that each parent should be entitled to equal contemporaneous leave entitlement instead of one parent receiving 10 days and the other receiving 4 months. Next slide, please. They also argued that Section 25B1, B6, and B7 should allow each adoptive parent 4 months parental leave, which in contrast to the legislation said 10 weeks for the one parent and 10 days for the other, and that it failed to grant any leave for adoptive parents over 2 years. And in fact, they tried to extend the argument to say there is reason that even adoptive parents of children over 4 should be entitled to the same period of leave because it's even more difficult to bond with children that are older. And they also, under 25C1 and C6, said that each commissioning parent in surrogacy should be entitled to 4 months, as opposed to the 10 weeks versus 10 days for the other. And more importantly, they extended the relief sought to say that Section 24 of the UIF, the Unemployment Insurance Fund, was unconstitutional and invalid because it excludes parents except biological mothers to claim such benefits. Section 26A1, A4, 27, 27.5, 27.9.4 of the UIF also allow each parent to claim benefits to the maximum of 17.32 weeks under the Act, versus the current 10 weeks or 10 days. And they said that you should include adoptive parents over of children over 2 years. Next slide, please. So what was the argument or the legal basis for the state, the government, the Minister of Employment and Labour to oppose this matter? So they had a number of bizarre reasonings, and I've summarized them succinctly. The first is they said that this process, this whole litigation, is way out of procedure and that it should not have even come to the courts yet because there was a process that needs to go before NEDLAC, which is the National Economic Development and Labour Council. And they said that all labour-related legislation has to go through this process, and also that they'd recently just revised it. So if there were any issues, they would have picked it up. They also argued that the laws were not unconstitutional and said if it was discriminatory, then it was justified. And they said that it was rationally developed in line with the South African economy. What was interesting is when they made this argument, they provided zero evidence to support the statement. They also made some counter arguments to say that it would have a huge impact on the UIF structure and systems, but they were not able to provide any report that can demonstrate this. This was quite problematic for me. They also raised the fact that we needed to consider the uniqueness of the South African landscape and consider the context of family structures in single parent families and migrant workers. And whilst this is true, I think they were disingenuous about raising this argument because this very point is why people are arguing what they're arguing for. And then, of course, the last 2 points that they argued, they said, no, this section is intended to protect women because they need to recover. And so this is why we're setting aside this specific period of time for them. And then they, of course, raised the concern of the abuse of fathers of this leave. And to be honest, the judge dealt with that quite swiftly in the judgment. Next slide, please. So what did the judge find, essentially? So the judgment was handed down on the 25th of October, and he declared that sections 25, 25A, B, and C of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act and the relevant corresponding provisions cited in the UIF are invalid and inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution because they unfairly discriminate between mothers and fathers, they unfairly discriminate between one set of parents and another, and on the basis of whether the child was born of their mother, whether they were adopted or they were conceived by surrogacy. And essentially said that Parliament has 2 years, 24 months from the date of the judgment to cure the defects of the provisions. He also provided an interim relief that entitles essentially all parents to a collective period of at least 4 months of parental leave. Next slide, please. So what was quite interesting, and I included two quotes from the judgment, and I want to highlight this because I think this is the crux of one of these discussions and why people are advocating for equal parental leave. And that is that we cannot continue this narrative that, you know, in terms of society, that women are considered, and this is an argument, servants and can be commodities, with the attitude that the care work lies solely with the role of the woman. And essentially the judge said in this case, the reach of the Constitution in its most modest aspirations does require social equality between men and women and is uncompromising in actualizing that as the status quo for everyone. Further, he went on to highlight that this ubiquitous recognition of parents, qua parents, is important rather than a strict delineation between fathers and mothers, which is a norm wholly in line with international instruments and with the Constitution. And there were a number of amici, friends of the court, that made submissions in depth about best practices, about customary international law, and the different best practices of how parental leave should be distributed and designed in that regard. I will include, in conclusion, say that there has been some questions around, you know, the need for a birth-giving mother that has recently given birth. Like, what about them? And in terms of leave and rest, how would they be factored into this? And whilst the interim relief doesn't entirely address that, and the judgment in itself makes some acknowledgement that, you know, during the 6 weeks after birth, in which a birth mother is not or may not work actually, except within specific conditions if a medical doctor has signed off on it, and that she is recovering physically. The judge also noted that during this period, she is nevertheless nurturing her child in parallel. And so the argument was not to dock 6 weeks from commissioning an adoptive parents or mothers because they did not experience physical childbirth, but they felt it was a compelling rationale to not make that distinction, to say that all mothers in these categories ought to be entitled to the same period of leave for the purpose of child nurture. And that extends to the primary caregiver as well. A final point would be to say that this judgment and how South African legislative processes work is once a piece of legislation or a section is declared unconstitutional, once it has been declared or confirmed, the unconstitutionality confirmed by the Constitutional Court, and it's referred back to Parliament to address, Parliament can make a decision about how they want to design the leave and structure it. So there is still an opportunity for the public and civil society to make extensive inputs in submissions about how that should look like. So the way it's structured currently in terms of the interim relief is not final, but the unconstitutionality, once confirmed by the court, is. And so there is room for a lot of advocacy to argue for more supportive parental leave in that regard. I will stop and thank everyone for their attention.
Thank you so much, Cayenne. Wow. I've learned so much, honestly, regarding this case. And you've really shared quite a lot of insights into this case, which I think it just proves how linking policy and implementation really comes into place. Because I must assume that this case really took a long time for it to be where it is today when we are celebrating this judgment. And like you say, that something that you mentioned that really stuck with me also is that we can't continue to say that care work lies with women alone, which is something that I can also relate to what Jonathan also mentioned earlier on the importance of involving men into the care work. So it's really uplifting. And I think another take that I'm taking from your presentation is how we need to continue lobbying. We need to continue working together to make the parental leave something that whenever it's taken to Parliament, then we know that we will definitely have more policies that govern how equal parental leave is going to look like, and not only in South Africa, but I'm also hoping that the other colleagues who are on the call can also take a lot of learnings from what the South African case of these two has taken us to. So thank you so much, Kayan, for this. And I'm glad to see that there are colleagues who are putting in questions. So I'm still inviting for more people to engage with us on the chat box. So without wasting much time, let's leave Africa for a bit. We want to hand over to Delfina, who's going to take us through the advocacy of parental leave in Argentina. I'm super excited, Delfina, that you were able to join us so that we hear more on what you have done so far in Argentina. So welcome, Delfina, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let me see. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Delfina Scienra. First of all, I want to thank the MenCare team and Equimundo for the invitation and all the organization they have done for this webinar. And it's a pleasure for me to be here to talk to you about the work we do in Argentina. I am representing ELA, which is a Latin American team for justice, for gender and justice, which is a feminist civil society organization that this year celebrates 20 years working for gender equality and women's access to justice. And I would like to start this presentation. We can move to the other slide. To start this presentation by saying a few words about the context here in Argentina in relation to parental leave. The first fact is that in Argentina, half of the people who work do not have access to any leave because they work informally or because they are self-employed. So half of the people doesn't have any parental leave at all. And the second fact is that those who do access to leave do it in a very unequal way, because the main labor law of the private sector establishes only 2 days of paternity leave, for example, and is one of the lowest leaves in the region, no, in Latin America, at the least. But then, depending on the will of each private company or through the, I don't know if this is, I'm saying this correctly, the translation, but is through the collective bargaining agreements that are established by each union, that in Argentina, the unions are really strong. You can have 5, 10, 15, 30 days. I mean, it's really variable. So it depends where you work. That's why we always say that, tell me what is your job, where do you work, under what regime, and I will tell you what leave you can have access to. So we have a situation of inequality here in Argentina. Let's move to the other slide, please. Okay, so no, it's okay. Oh yes, it's okay there. So I will, now I would like to tell you a little bit more about what we have been doing at ELA for more than 10 years now to promote equal leaves and to universalize access to leave as part of the right to care. And although our work in the issue of care is broader, I will try to focus specifically on what leave concerns. And I will mention 5 main strategies that we are using and have been using. The first one that was the previous slide is that we specialize in conducting research, producing reports, and producing arguments for decision makers. So here, the first one was in 2012. Our aim is to be able to explain the connection between the unequal distribution of care and its feminization with other gender inequalities and the negative effect that this has on the development of countries. It's not our favorite argument, the economic one, but we think that, and we believe that it's the most effective regarding governments to go with the economic argument. So we always say that the removal of women from the workplace means that they lose opportunities and that national and regional economies no longer receive the benefits these workers could generate. And we have countries that grow less. And we have also negative effects on child development. And then we can move to the other slide that are all another examples of the reports that we have been making to this year. And so we seek to influence the creation of public policies that ensure the right to care for all people, that allow the possibility of choosing how to care, and especially to promote social co-responsibility so that care does not mean less employment, lower income, more poverty, less social security, and worse quality of life for women. And we have been making a lot of legislative advocacy, if that's the term. I will tell a little bit more in other slides. And lastly, in this point, we have made reports, analyzing the bills that are presented in Congress year after year, arguing why we should tend towards equal and universal leaves. We have provided evidence of why paternity leave are key to promote more egalitarian, less violent societies, and with better child development. And we also made analysis of concrete experiences of extended leaves, such as the case, for example, of the local government of the city of Buenos Aires, which is our main city, to demonstrate the positive impact it has for families as a whole. We can pass now to the other slide, please. Thank you. Secondly, at ELA, we seek to work in a multi-stakeholder manner because we believe that the best way to move forward is to work with different actors that are part of the care diamond. Please to the next one. In our case, we work on the one hand with the private sector, which is an important actor for us because it has the potential to transform the lives of many working people and to generate practices that promote care from every work space and that go many times beyond the law, the actual law. So in recent years, we have been providing a lot of workshops and trainings, developing research for and with companies, private companies, gathering evidence of the needs that exist, the challenges they face, the progress they have made, and the experiences they have. And finally, together with UNICEF, the local UNICEF agency, we have developed a group of companies called Companies That Care, Empresas que Cuidan, where we gather almost 40 companies that have good practices regarding care, such as extended parental leave. And we also develop with that group a free digital tool that allows companies to diagnose the progress they have made in care policies and serves as a tool for management. That is this one in the bottom left side, ECU, where you look at ECU. That's the digital free tool that we made. And if we could go to the next slide, please. And on the other hand, we also work with trade unions to complete, you know, the labor sphere or dimension, because in Argentina, trade unions are very important and they are key actors that can help us to advance beyond the minimum level that is set by the law. So their potential is great. And in this case, we also do training and workshops, both in person, virtually. We also developed a self-administered online course, a free course, specific to the subject for unions. And we also conducted a service on experiences and good practices in terms of care in collective bargaining agreements. You know, we want to show that a lot of unions have made progress beyond the law, the same way as companies, but the potential of unions is larger than companies in individual cases, you know? So as you can see, we mix a lot of trainings with research, because Ella specialized in research, so we try to produce evidence all the time. Now, if we could move forward to the next one, please. Thirdly, we carry out campaigns on social networks and on public services aimed at the general public, with the objective of raising awareness of the problem and promoting greater social demand on the issue. Here, the State of the World's Fathers was especially useful for us because we could confirm that people have very naturalized the problem of caregiving and fail, I don't know if that's the correct term, but fail to think it as a public policy problem, you know, like a problem where the state must intervene. So we think that that is an issue that we have to continue working, especially with these awareness campaigns and public, general public campaigns. And we have been making these spots and videos with different actors, you know, with UNICEF, with a men organization that works specifically on the issue of paternity leave, such as Campaña Paternar, and we have made videos, graphic campaigns, participating in the media, writing opinion articles. We try to be really active with campaigns. So that is another of our another dimension of our work. And I have two more topics, and that will be it. So if we can go to the next one, please. Fourthly, we do not work alone. We rather, or we believe in seeking to form alliances that allow us to strengthen and amplify our work. For example, please, the next one. We are part of the Global Care Alliance and of an alliance here in Argentina called Agenda for Equality, where we advocated on the issue of leave, especially with the private sector. And this year, Ella created a new group called Compromiso por los Cuidados. It's like Commitment for Care, which is a multi-stakeholder space where we brought together different civil society organizations, independent academics and researchers, journalists, social movement, and trade unionists. And the idea is to discuss the agenda, to make activities together, to strengthen our voice. And one of our first actions this year was to promote the treatment in the Congress of a bill that was about comprehensive reform of care leave. Now, if we could move to the last part. And fifth and lastly, we participate in different forums and spaces as specialists. We have the honor of being part in 2020 of the drafting commission that included 9 specialists in the preliminary bill requested by the National Executive Power to discuss in the Congress the creation of a comprehensive care system and a comprehensive reform of the leave scheme. So that was a really nice and important work for us. And we have also participated in the conferences convened by the National Congress last year and this year to discuss the extension of the leave scheme. We have a lot of projects and bills presented in Congress, more than 50, but we haven't been able to move forward with this. And we believe because we are in an economic crisis now in Argentina, and political parties agree with the idea, but they think that this is a cost that that is not a priority now to spend on parental leave reform. So we are trying to counteract that argument, saying it's an investment, as we know, and so we are in that struggle. So that will be it for me. I hope I have been clear and that it was interesting for you. And I'm available for any questions you may have. And you can also find me in the email that is on the last slide. So thank you again for the invitation. And I'm very happy to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delphina. Thank you so much for taking some of us to Argentina. It was my first time to be in Argentina, just hearing from your overview. So I'm really, really excited. But I think what is striking out for me is how there are similarities with some of our African countries here, especially when you were talking about how there is more of informal and self-employed employment in Argentina, which is something that we too in most of our African countries are experiencing. And it was quite interesting to see how you use reports and workshops and seminars and actually engaging policymakers. But again, for me, what really strikes me is how you also engage the private sector and the unions, which is something that I think most of us tend to overlook when we do our implementation. But no, I really see the value of us engaging the unions and the private sector. And also to mention that for MenCare, we also do have our 50-50 commitment where we do engage with the private sector, because for those who are in the formal employment, that's where we need to also advocate more on policies around equal parental leave. So thank you so much for sharing with us some of these findings in Argentina. And it also fits quite nicely because our last speaker, who is Nick, is going to be taking us through the global trends and insights on parental leave. So Nick, it's last but definitely not least. In my culture, we say that he who speaks last is the king. So we didn't pick you last for no reason, but thank you so much. And over to you, Nick.
Thank you so much, and thank you to you, Umpo, and MenCare and Equimundo, and all those who've spoken. I think the structure of this conversation, starting local with Jonathan's insights on, working directly on positive parenting and fatherhood, and expanding out courts, the experience in Argentina, just really frames what I'm going to share, which is how far we've come globally. So you can move on to the next slide. I'm speaking today from the World Policy Analysis Center. Oh, and it seems like my slides are a little bit distorted, but we'll make it work. So we work across data areas at the World Policy Analysis Center. We have more than 2,500 policies for all 193 UN countries in a whole range of areas that you see here, and many more on our website. Across all these areas, we work to see how far the world has come, what the trends of global law and policy in a range of areas that matter to advancing gender equality in the economy, at home, and broadly. And then we weave together that policy data with rigorous evidence and case studies of how we can make change. So I'll give you one of the examples if you want to move to the next slide. So this is a map of the paid leave available to mothers of infants for all the countries in the world. And this is, as of 2022, we will have exciting updated data early next year that will be 2024 data. I happen to be speaking today from one of the few countries in red, the United States. 96% of the world, meaning that the US is joined only by Papua New Guinea, Suriname, and some small Pacific Island nations in not having paid leave for mothers of infants. And you can also see that the vast majority of countries, about 2/3, get into either the 14-week green color or the dark green, which is 26 weeks or more. These are countries that meet the ILO basic minimum recommendation of 14 weeks for mothers of infants. But if you move to the next slide, as everybody knows from everything that has already been said, on fatherhood, we aren't doing nearly as well on a policy front. It's simply a structure where 63% of the world provides some form of leave, but 45% of countries, this is less than 3 weeks. And, we see that our research shows that only 7% of the world reserves at least 14 weeks for fathers to match that ILO standard for mothers. You can also see that the way leave policies are structured all around the world is different and can vary a lot based upon which are the leaves that are specifically available to all parents or leaves that are available specifically to fathers. So one of the silver linings of this, if you move to the next slide, is that over time, we've seen changes in a positive direction on this. So this is from 1995 to last year. And you can see a dramatic trend over time, particularly on the middle line, which is paid paternity leave, which is a movement from 13% of countries all the way up to 56% over the course of just about a generation. Yes, the maternity leave line is trending upwards. It should get all the way to 100%, but the orange line should get there as well. And we've been really inspired by a lot of the movements all around the world that have been the real driving force for this passage. And we, see these trends only continuing to accelerate. And what we oftentimes hear is this is just something that exists for high-income countries or just European countries or just those with a comprehensive social safety net. But if you look at the next slide, which is the trend in Africa from 1995 to 2022, you can see a dramatic expansion in introduction of paid paternal leave policies as well. So there's a long ways to go, both in Africa and all around the world, but the trends are very clear on the overall directionality of the way public policy is approaching caregiving. So to get to the gold standard that Mpo led to in her introduction and that is recommended in the State of the World's Fathers report, we still have a long ways to go. But I also think that when we think about normalizing equal parental leave, we're really talking about equalizing and normalizing caregiving. And it is worth, from a public policy perspective, complicating it a bit to make sure that we are having a set of policies that's reaching all workers, as many others have said. So if you look at the next slide, we also look at the way public policies can or cannot explicitly reach out to include traditionally marginalized, historically marginalized, or those working in the informal economy. So this slide here shows whether or not parental leave policies explicitly reach self-employed workers, part-time workers, domestic workers, and agricultural workers. So, these aren't all the categories of informal workers, but all of these are historically marginalized forms of workers compared to those in the formal employment. You can see the maternal leave policies and the paternal leave policies on this slide. And in every case, there are examples where leave policies have been designed to include those types of workers. As you can see, more likely to be maternal leave than paternal leave, which embeds caregiving discrimination in our laws. But it is possible, and there are models, and we've done in-depth case studies on how some of these countries are working to achieve this and what the implementation gaps are. But I think it's worth noting that when we talk about leave policies just being for the formal economy, that is historically quite true, but there are models out there where folks can include different categories of workers into their leave schemes and can do so successfully. So that's one complicating factor. A second, if you move to the next slide, is when we talk about leave, it's not just in the first 1,000 days. We do need to also think about the leave that parents need to take throughout a child's life, because there are caregiving needs beyond those first parental leave days. 63% of countries have no paid leave available for parents to meet their children's everyday health needs. As you can see, there are, countries with unpaid leave in every region, across areas, and oftentimes these leaves aren't necessarily long enough to accommodate something that is more serious, and we can talk about what that would look like on a separate map. But the notion that there needs to be some type of leave to meet everyday health needs that come up is also a gendered notion, because historically, if somebody needs to step out of work to deal with a child who has the flu, it's overwhelmingly going to be the mother, and that creates some of the structural motherhood gaps we see in formal employment numbers all around the world. But it's not just everyday health needs. If you move to the next slide, caregiving happens across the life course. So we also know that there needs to be leave available for workers to be able to deal with the health needs of adult family members, including seriously ill spouses or aging parents or adult children. And 58% of countries fail to provide any leave. And of those that do, only 78% of only 22% of countries provide at least 2 weeks of leave to support for an aging parent's health needs. And for anybody who's gone through the process of helping an aging parent transition, it can certainly take more than 2 weeks. So these are big policy gaps globally across the life course. To complicate this even further, if you look at the next slide, we also need to think about how countries are prohibiting caregiving discrimination in the workplace, because historically, discrimination in the workplace has been thought about very much so on a gendered lens. There needs to be protections based upon gender. But 93% of the world has taken that first step, but when it comes to pregnancy status or marital status or motherhood status or fatherhood status, an increasingly smaller number, down to the point where less than half the countries in the world prohibit caregiving discrimination at work based on fatherhood status. So there are steps that countries can and do need to take to close caregiving discrimination gaps. And then if we look at one last area, just to raise in terms of building this broader notion of equality in care, if you look at the next slide, please. We oftentimes get asked about the interactivity between norm change and policy change. Which needs to come first? Do the norms need to be in place to be able to pass the laws, or do the laws impact the norms? Our research, and the research that we've done with colleagues, is that it's a two-way street. This is data from over 68,000 individuals across 9 countries. How does passing paid parental leave policies that encourage or incentivize fathers to take time off change attitudes towards women's work? 27% more likely to disagree with the statement that when jobs are scarce, men have the right to a job more than women, so with only marginal differences across. So this is showing that the passage of a parental leave law actually helps move norms. And obviously, those two pieces need to move in tandem. And we've talked a lot about the programmatic ways of changing those norms over time. But I think in the norm change discussion, we need to think about the role that public policy can help in actually driving forward some of those changes. So I want to leave some time for question and answer, but I want to end with just 2 brief slides. First is that all of our data, everything I've shared here, and hundreds of more maps are available and are publicly downloadable, worldpolicycenter.org. And if you move to the next slide, if you click on the drop down in the top right, our next slide, please. Our website's available in 6 languages, including all of the UN formal languages: English, French, Spanish, Chinese, and Russian. If you ever have any questions, last slide, please feel free to be directly in contact with me. This is my information, or you can find us at worldpolicycenter.org. Again, deep thanks to MenCare for all of their work. Deep thanks to Equimundo and the whole State of the World's Fathers team for putting together this advocacy document that can be used from Argentina to Oman and all the areas beyond where we know it gets used. It's truly a pleasure to be with you all, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Wow, thank you so much, Nick. It's always a pleasure to listen to your to your findings and presentations. In all your discussions and presentations, there's always something new. I remember even in Nairobi, there's quite a lot of work that the World Policy Center has done, which I think for us is quite beneficial, because someone sitting in the audience may be wondering that we're speaking about parental leave, what's the fuss all about? But with the findings that you've shown us, I think most of us are really encouraged to do more and see the value of why we need to continue advocating for equal parental care. And I think for me, what's really stuck with me is the disparities in your first two slides, how maternity leave, very progressive, but when it comes to paternity leave, then it was almost all red everywhere. So for me, it really gives me the vigor to continue working hard in advocating for parental leave. I'm cautious about time, and I'm very thankful to those who've managed to put questions, and I'm glad that my panelists have managed to respond to some of the questions. In just under a minute, I'll just ask all of my speakers to just give a last final short parting words to encourage us, especially on the advocating for equal parental leave. So any thoughts, any parting ways that will really encourage us to continue working on this field? I'll start with Tavishi. Just under a minute.
Sure, I'll keep it even shorter. I mean, I think this idea of, oftentimes we want to see sort of the voting bank, right? Who is the electorate? Who are the people who actually sort of shifts a lot of the agenda, the political agenda, right? Often. And I think that we have missed an opportunity to see men and women as carers. And I appreciate, Nick, you sort of talking about the multiple responsibilities of caregiving that people take on. It's not just caregiving to children, right? We're caregiving to so many different kinds of responsibilities. We do kind of bring that up in the State of the World's Fathers 2023. So I think that the idea that we need to now sort of shift our political agendas and start seeing humans as carers, and then recognizing how much sort of the caregiving is a bedrock of every single relationship that men and women and people of all gender kind of do and have, whether it's to their own spouse, to their parents, to their pet, to their neighbors, community, planet, children, and to themselves. I think that could be a way in which we use that as shifting, again, policies and putting that on advocacy agendas, because these are voters. These are people who actually want to go out there and make those kind of election decisions. And so putting care at the center of those agendas is now becoming crucial and critical. I'll stop.
Thank you, Tavishi. In under a minute, Jonathan.
I was recently on a radio program talking about exam stress, and the presenter asked me, how has the world of school changed, in the last 20 years? And one of my replies was around gender fluidity. I think as humans, we're too tied up with binary, simplistic conversations. And I think the fact that the youth of today are actively embracing gender fluidity is going to lead to a movement. It's going to be contentious. It's going to be difficult, like all movements are. But I think we need to move away from these set roles of masculine and feminine towards something that is a lot more diverse and inclusive and celebrates humanity rather than boxes.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Kayan, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think this judgment has been a good bedrock for establishing change, ensuring more laws that are contribute to gender equality. But maybe just to highlight the need and opportunity for us to do more advocacy, especially during this process of changing the laws. We're seeing more and more opportunities and cases come up where we are able to challenge the status quo and really advance this argument about recognition of the value of the care economy and put it at the center. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kayan. Delphina?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think that is necessary that we continue sharing these global experiences. So I celebrate this space and all of the other that Equimundo and MenCare have been making, because one sees that what happens at the national level is not unique, as we could see with this last presentation. There is so much that we share, although we have differences, but we share a lot of same problems. And I think we need to learn more and to share more the strategies that we are developing, like the advocacy strategies, the legal strategies, and to learn more in terms of what the countries that already achieve it, how they come to that place. And sorry for my English. And also to say that we believe we have to focus more to make people see this as a public policy problem, to generate more social demand. So at ELA, we're going to try to work for that goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delphina. I was just quickly typing to Nick to say maybe if he can respond to the question that has been posted to him in his final thoughts by Suleiman. I don't know if you can see it, Nick.
I can see it. Yes. Thank you so much for the question on the role that public policy has to play in changing norms. There has been backlash, particularly in things like corporal punishment. Where to draw the line is obviously a complicated question. It's a cultural question. It's a legal question. It's a human rights question. We don't have a lot of research on corporal punishment specifically, and gender affirmation and reconstruction surgery. So it's not an area where we have a lot of expertise. I know that's an area where the legal structures all around the world are developing very quickly. We've worked a lot with a number of different collaborators in this space. I would point you to ILGA, the International Lesbian Intersex Gay Alliance, for a lot of their researchers, and it looks like Jonathan is responding as well. My one note that I would end on for everybody is that change only happens when people at all levels work together. So local civil society, regional and global civil society organizations, well-meaning policymakers, researchers, building bridges between those different communities that so often get siloed is how we see change happening most often and most effectively. So regardless of where you sit across the range of the different actors involved in this broader movement toward normalizing and equalizing care, please take time to try to break down those barriers and work together, because that's how we achieve change together.
Okay, thank you so much, Nick. And thank you so much to my panelists for the wonderful discussions. And thank you to all of you who've managed to share your comments and contributions towards this wonderful webinar. So I want to also invite you to the next webinar, which is going to be on the 1st of December. So we will be continuing the series of the engagements that we are having in this 6-part series of the caring recommendations that we got from the State of the World Fathers report. So the last webinar is on the G part of the series, which is generate and disseminate mainstream media that portrays men and boys as caring and competent caregivers. So I would like to invite you to look out for the invitations that we'll be sharing out soon. And thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that you are going to have a wonderful weekend. For more information on how you can get involved on MenCare, please see the link, and all the best in your endeavor to create a world where we have caring men. I thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you very much.